So we've reached the halfway point of the 2023 Formula 1 season, and as you may know, after each race we give a driver a rating between 1 and 10 for their performances that weekend. So now would be a good time to add up all those ratings and rank every driver on the grid from 1st to 21st for the 2023 season. Firstly, in 21st place, with a score of 17 out of 120 is Daniel Ricciardo. Now for anyone else this would be an awful score, but I'll let Ricciardo off a little bit because he did miss the first 10 races of the year and has only taken part in the last 2. The high point of those 2 was his return in Hungary, where he outqualified his teammate, got caught up in a lap 1 incident and still managed to finish ahead of his teammate in the race. The low point being an okay performance last time out at Spa. I imagine Ricciardo will get better as the season goes on, and who knows where he may end up at the end of the year. He may not actually be at the bottom of the list. In 20th place is Nick de Vries with a score of 53 out of 120. Now like Ricciardo, de Vries has missed a couple races, but even still de Vries has not received the best scores. His highest score received from me was an 8 out of 10 for his race in Monaco, where he finished a season high of 12th and beat his teammate, as well as many other much faster cars. But there were more lows than highs for Nick, with his lowest score being a 3, which he got twice. Firstly in Baku, where he crashed in qualifying and the race, and was just generally slow in the sprint races. The second 3 out of 10 came in Miami, where he outqualified his teammates for the first time, but threw it all away with a stupid crash at the start of the race. Now we have 2 drivers in joint 18th place with a score of 63 out of 120. Firstly, it's Logan Sargent, who's having a difficult rookie year in a difficult Williams car. The high point for him was the first race of the season, where I gave him an 8 out of 10 for his 12th place finish, where he didn't seem to be too far off his teammate. But as the season has gone on, that gap has grown. The lowest point for Logan being in Baku, where he scored a 3 out of 10 after crashing his car in qualifying, meaning he couldn't take place in the sprint race and giving up a great opportunity where the Williams seemed strong. The second driver in 18th with 63 points is Lance Stroll. Lance started the year strong with his valiant effort in Bahrain, with broken wrists earning him a 10 out of 10 from me. But he followed that up with some very lackluster performances in a car that was very strong in the hands of his teammate, especially at the start of the year. The lowest point for Lance so far has been Monaco, where he qualified 14th whilst his teammate occupied the front row, and he spent most of the race fighting the Haas of Kevin Magnussen before retiring. In 17th place with a score of 71 is Zhou Guanyu. I often say that the Alfa Romeos are very anonymous during the race weekends, and that's been very much true all this year. The high point for Zhou's year was firstly in Monaco, when he was able to go from 19th to 13th in a race where everyone else was struggling to overtake, and then again the next race in Spain, where he would start 13th and finish 9th to bring home some vital points for the AlphaTauri team. The lowest point for Zhou though this year has been the Hungarian Grand Prix, where despite an incredible 5th place in qualifying, he threw it all the way into the first corner and had to end up settling for a 16th place finish. In 16th place is his teammate Valtteri Bottas, with a score of 73 out of 120. Valtteri's high spot of the year was, like many on this list, at the first race of the year in Bahrain, where he finished 8th, which is AlphaTauri's highest finishing position of the year so far, but since then he's only gone on to score 1 more point all year. His lowest point will be the very next race, where he finished dead last and was the only driver to be lapped at the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix. And now we have 2 drivers in joint 14th place with a score of 74. Firstly, it's Yuki Tsunoda. He's had a couple bright spots across the year, but some of his best drives actually ended with him outside the points, such as in Saudi Arabia or Miami. But there's also been a few lows for Yuki, such as the 19th place performance at the Austrian Grand Prix. Also in 14th place with 74 points is Kevin Magnussen. This has been a very mixed year for K-Mag, with the highs being very high, such as his drive in Miami, where he qualified unbelievably in 4th and spent much of the race going toe-to-toe with the much faster Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, where he would eventually finish 10th. The lowest point for Magnussen though was in Canada, where his teammate qualified 2nd, whilst he had to settle for 13th, where he spent most of the race fighting Nick De Vries before finishing 17th. Now moving on to joint 12th on 77 points. Firstly, it's Esteban Ocon, whose high point was obviously the incredible podium in Monaco, for which I gave him a 10 out of 10. Ocon's lowest point was at Bahrain, where he equalled a record for the most amount of penalties ever received in a single race. He would then go on to break that record with even more penalties in Austria. Also in 12th is Carlos Sainz. It's been a difficult year for the Ferrari duo, Carlos's high point being in Canada when Ferrari pulled off a very rare perfect strategy call, but it was only good enough for 5th. Carlos also had a great race during the Austrian sprint race where he came from 5th to 3rd, although his lowest point has to be Spa, where he ended his own race as well as the race of Oscar Piastri at the first corner on the first lap, and as punishment was made to drive a broken Ferrari around Spa for 25 laps. In 11th we have Charles Leclerc with 78 points. The highlight of Charles' year has to be the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, where he got the pole for the sprint race and the main race and finished on the podium in both races. But as it always seems to be for Charles, it's not plain sailing in the Ferrari, his lowest point being qualifying 19th for the Spanish Grand Prix and only being able to finish 11th. Now it gets very crowded as we have a 5-way tie for 6th place on 79 points. Let's start with Nico Hülkenberg. The comeback king has made his return to F1 this year in the Haas team, the highlight being his 7th place finish in Australia, which was actually also close to being his first podium if that last lap had counted. He also had a great run in the Austrian sprint race, which saw him running 2nd place for a while before falling to 6th. But whilst his teammate flew high in Miami, he could only manage a 15th place finish. Also on 79 points is the rookie Oscar Piastri. The Australian is having an incredible rookie year, almost getting a podium in Silverstone if not for the safety car, then following that up with a great performance in Hungary and leading the sprint race in Spa before finishing 2nd. But it has been a strange year for McLaren, with the car at the start of the year seeming a far cry from the one that we see now. Oscar's low point during the year was starting the Miami race in 19th and finishing in 19th. His teammate Lando Norris is also in joint 6th place, who also had their season highlights at Silverstone and Hungary, as well as a great performance in Austria. But Lando has also struggled with the car when it wasn't as good, his worst performance being in Saudi Arabia, where he started 19th and finished 17th. But also in Spain, he managed a fantastic qualifying performance to start 3rd, but threw it all away in the first corner and finished in 17th. Pierre Gasly is next, who's had a good first year in Alpine, with strong showings in Bahrain, Miami and Monaco. His main failings have largely been out of his control, with DNFs in Hungary and Silverstone, which he could do very little about, but there also is the big crash in Australia, which took him and his teammate out, whilst running in good positions, which Gasly has to take the majority of the blame for. The final person in joint 6th is Sergio Perez. Sergio has had very strong moments this year, as he is able to brag that he's the only person not called Max Verstappen to actually win a race this year, in Saudi Arabia as well as in Azerbaijan, as well as the Azerbaijan sprint race. But Sergio Perez also has the distinction of being the only driver that has received a 0 out of 10 from me, and that was during the Monaco Grand Prix, where he crashed in qualifying without setting a lap before eventually finishing the race in 16th place. We're into the top 5 now with Alexander Albon, who's on 85 points. Alex has done a fantastic job in the Williams this year, the highlight being his incredible drive in Canada, where he somehow qualified 9th and finished 7th in one of the drives of the year. The worst of the year for Alex came in Monaco, but even that wasn't that bad, finishing 14th in a car that realistically should have finished a lot lower. In 4th we have George Russell on 86 points. George Russell is often called Mr. Consistency, and I think that's what he has been this year, consistently getting decent points for the Mercedes team. His highlight of the year has to be the podium in Spain, but let's not forget what a great drive he was having in Australia before it all very dramatically fell apart. That moment was actually one of the extreme few where I honestly thought that Red Bull might not win a race. George's lowest point this year has to be the Canadian Grand Prix, where he hit the wall, but even then he seemed to carry it quite well for a lot of the race. Into the top 3 now, with third place with a score of 93 out of 120 for Fernando Alonso. It's been a year of career revival for Alonso, starting with that great podium in Bahrain that started a streak of podiums for him that would eventually see him on 6 of the first 8 podiums of the year. But the Aston has started to struggle lately, and even then Alonso has driven well, especially in the main race at Spa, where he finished 5th. But the low point for him was probably the Hungarian Grand Prix, where he had to settle for a season low finish of 9th. At this point in the season, he is one of 3 drivers to score points at every race, and the only driver to make it into Q3 at every single race. In second place with 97 points is Lewis Hamilton. He is one of 2 drivers that I've actually given more than one 10 out of 10 to this year. His first came with his second place finish in Australia, and he would get his second with another second place in Spain. And then his latest 10 out of 10 came with that great drive at Silverstone. The low point though for Lewis this year would be the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, where he had to settle for 7th place in the sprint and then 6th in the main race. Then in Austria he was 10th in the sprint and his lowest finishing spot in a main race all year of 8th. And finally, in first place with a score of 113 points out of 120, of course, it's Max Verstappen. Like I said, I gave Lewis 10 out of 10 3 times, but this year I give Max a 10 out of 10 at 8 of the 12 races. Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Monaco, Spain, Canada, Austria, Hungary and Belgium. He has a season average of a 9.4 out of 10 from my ratings this year, and at this point it's becoming even more difficult to nitpick him than ever. The lowest score I've given him all year is a 7 out of 10, and that was at the Australian Grand Prix, which is a race he actually won. So there you have it, that's my ratings for the midpoint. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Who do you think will be moving up and down these ratings throughout the remainder of the season? Let me know in the comments, and until next time, goodbye.